Join us September 21st through the 23rd for the 2023 AMSN Annual Convention in fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada.
Double down on your commitment to our practice and to your patients by gathering with your peers and aspirational leaders for 3 days of learning and networking.
Don't miss the premier event for medical surgical nurses. Register now at amsn.org.
We'll see you in Vegas.
This is Caroline.
This is Maritess.
And this is Laura. Welcome to Med Surg Moments, the AMSN podcast.
This podcast is an engaging look at the lives of and surrounding medical surgical nurses.
We're proud medical surgical nurses, just like you, sharing our stories, insights, and experiences to support you in your nursing journey.
Our topic today is things I never expected to experience as a med surg nurse. But as always, before we get started, let's play a little Rose and Thorn. Laura, why don't you start?
Got some pretty exciting news. My rose that I wanted to share with everybody today is that I actually took and passed my certification exam for NPD. So I am now a board certified nursing professional development practitioner.
Well done. Well done.
Yes.
Excellent.
One of the hardest tests I think I've ever taken. It was really, really, really difficult. So I'm very proud of myself. That made me smile most of the week. And now my thorn is I'm having to pick back up everything I pushed to the bottom of my list to study for that test. So I'm feeling a little overwhelmed at work right now. A lot of things that are coming due here. I always thought that the fall was a long time away, but now the fall is right around the corner. So a lot of things in the works. Maritess, what about you?
Congratulations. It's a great accomplishment. So for my rose and thorns, I started learning how to cook, and I started with little things, simple recipes. I think I am progressing because the kids are saying, "Mommy, there is hope. You can do it." And so I think I find that so funny because they're so kind, but being very honest as well. There's work to do, but I'm getting there. I wanted to try how to make pasta from scratch. So we'll find out and see. I'll do my best. I will really do my best. The thorn part is, as you know, kids already started going to school, and my kids are all homeschooled. And so it's a bit of a challenge for my youngest. He's 5. He doesn't want to really focus on writing, reading, and more of play time, which I agree, children love to play. But we're trying to find strategies on how to engage him with reading. He knows how to read. He's 5. He loves to read, but he only loves to read the books that he loves to read. But as we all know, with school, you have to read other books. So that's a bit of a thorn. Caroline, what's new with you?
I applaud you for your desire to learn how to cook. The best thing that I make is a reservation.
That's so funny.
You just don't want me in the kitchen. There's another joke out there that I only have a kitchen because it came with the house. I just don't cook. So that kind of moves into my thorn because my husband is back on the road traveling. And so it's sad that he's not at home. It's even sadder because he does all the cooking. So now I have to figure out cooking meals for my daughter and my mom every night. And
take out.
So there's plenty of restaurants and we are working our way through them. So that's kind of my rose and my thorn together. The other rose, though, is this new job that I'm absolutely loving and getting a chance to develop content for nurse leaders and develop a whole portfolio of education. So having a blast with that new position. So let's move on to our topic, things I never expected to experience as a med surg nurse. I kind of inherited this topic, but I can always share stories. I think I could split this into two conversations. When I was a med surg nurse in England and then the differences when I moved to the United States. And I think that's a good way to kick off because things I never experienced as a med surg nurse in the United States was the autonomy that we are given. It's a wonderful thing. Now I know this, but I never forget being asked to set up for an IV. And I went into the med room, got the bag, got the tubing, primed everything, hung it all up, got the pump ready. The doctor walked in the room, had a complete meltdown. It's like, why isn't this IV started? Well, at that point, I had never started an IV. Nurses in England just don't do IVs routinely. You have to go for extra training. And I looked at him aghast, and he took a look at me, and he's like, oh, you're one of those foreign nurses. I understand now. So the autonomy was wonderful, but it took a little bit of adjustment for sure. So that was one of my biggest shocks. And then from there, of course, I never expected, I guess, the variety of patients in a med surg environment. As I remember from England, everything was so much more compartmentalized. We had a surgical floor, and that's all you took care of. People going to the operating room, or the theatre, as we called it in England. The medical floor was full of your stroke patients, your COPD patients, almost like mini specialties, all in their own right. When I came to the United States, everything just all together. So I really had to up my game and improve my skill set because I'd just been used to straight orthopedics in my most recent position before I moved to America. And so I didn't expect to experience the wide variety and the all-encompassment of what a medical surgical nurse is really all about. So they were my two biggest takeaways and my initial observations. What about you guys?
Caroline, I can relate a lot to what you said. I remember just recognizing the fact that a lot of times every single patient at some point is going to end up on a med surg floor. You're going to have just a little bit of everything. That was quite an eye-opener for me. But the one thing that really surprised me, as I can remember coming on as a brand new grad, just being so excited about being a nurse, and then the realization that not every patient wants to learn. I can remember recognizing that patients didn't understand what was going on with them, but they were reluctant to even pay any attention. It's like they just wanted me to do everything for them. They didn't want to learn the why. That was hard for me to kind of accept people where they are. I could only do what I could do to help get them up to speed, but it was really up to them to take that next step.
Yes, that makes me think of something else as well. In England, the medical profession in general is or it used to be, whether it's like this now, but it was a very esteemed profession, and nurses and doctors were very well thought of and respected, and that's still the same here, I think, to a certain extent. But patients were just so grateful, and they cooperated, and they said please and thank you, and they took everything you gave them and were just thanking you all the time. As you just said, a little different here. Patients didn't really want to be in the hospital. They didn't want to participate in their care. They were not grateful at all. So I guess that was another big difference and something I didn't think I'd experience until I came over to the States.
And I really want to piggyback on that because as a foreign nurse coming to the United States as well, that's really one of my culture shocks. You know, like as a nurse from another country, I always say ma'am, sir. And I remember coming here and one of the gentlemen said to me, don't ever call me sir because I feel old. And so I'm sorry because that's how I do my nursing care, how I interact with my patients. And so I really had to practice not to say ma'am, sir, and just call them by first name. But also the Med Surg unit, one of the things that I really didn't expect is how much power we have. You mentioned, Caroline, about the autonomy. I am so surprised like how we can drive. It's really up to us as nurses to find solutions for our patients. It's also up to us how we can drive the treatment, the care, family members, and, how do we influence others? I think that's a very powerful word. Very recently, I gave a presentation during Nurses Week about our influence. How do we influence other people? And as Med Surg nurses, we can drive the wound care nurse, the pain management team, the doctors, family members who doesn't want to talk about their lives, right? That's another, because you need to be culturally aware as well. There's so much that we can do as Med Surg nurses. So use that influence, use that power of your voice, I guess, to influence others.
For real. I really didn't understand what critical thinking was when I first came over here. People would talk about nurses and critical thinking. I'm like, what are they talking about? If I need an answer, I go to the doctor. The doctor tells me everything. Really a very subservient role. And then all of a sudden you move across the Atlantic and you're asked your opinion, you're asked to make decisions, you're asked to make not just care plans, which we used to do in England certainly, but put them into practice. And you had the autonomy to do that because that's what you were licensed to do. That was part of your practice of being a nurse. And yes, cultural differences as well. I thought the United Kingdom was diverse, but I wasn't quite expecting the different approach to that when I arrived in Little Rock, Arkansas, and meet people who really truly had never met anyone from a foreign country. They really had not. So a very insular community. They were very interested to hear our stories as we were to hear them. And so that was something I never thought I would have to come across as well. Does anyone have any crazy stories? They've got to be out there, right? You know, our listeners are waiting for the crazy stories.
I can remember the craziest story that I had. I remember I was a manager on a Med Surg unit, and I had a patient that had a petting zoo. They had a lot of different types of animals at their home. And one of the sons smuggled in some kind of monkey. I can't remember what kind of monkey. Didn't ask before they brought the monkey in. It started making noise, and the noise made its way to my office. I had to go down there and say, oh, we really can't have this animal in here next to the patient. So I had to politely ask them to remove the monkey. But the patient was happy to have seen the pet.
That's too
I never
funny.
thought I'd have to wrangle monkeys as a nurse.
Well, and that makes me think of something else, because here we had this wonderful thing called policy and procedure. And so there's a policy that states that animals are not allowed on the floor. You know,
Oh, yes.
In England,
Questioned.
you didn't have that ammunition in England. And I wonder how I even practiced without policies and procedures. We must have had them, but I just don't remember them being so apparent. Here, everything's policy driven. Everything's procedure driven. I remember having to write a policy, but be part of a policy about the definition of what's therapeutic. And a pet python, I'm sorry, that's just not therapeutic. We are not bringing pet pythons into the hospital. But believe you me, people tried it.
If they have documentation that it provides them emotional support.
Can you imagine? Yes. I mean, really? Yeah, no pythons here.
Well, Carolyn, it's funny because I used to have a pet python. I wouldn't bring it in a hospital.
I could never visit you. I could never come to your house. I could never even step within the perimeter of your house. I'm terrified of snakes. You had a pet python? Oh my gosh.
I used to
see you having a pet python, Maritess.
Yeah, so it was given to me in a duffel bag. It was a gift. It was a birthday gift. I was in the dorm, and my friend was saying, you do have a Chinese descent, right? Yes, I am. So she said, I have a lucky gift for you. In a duffel bag, and it's moving. And I said, what is that? And I opened it, and it's so cool.
Oh dear. We cannot be friends.
It's fun though at first, but I had to give it away because it's so expensive. You have to feed kilos of meat.
Oh, no. No. Oh, my goodness.
I had to give it up.
Well, I'm glad you did. Maybe that was the one that the visitor was trying to bring into my floor.
But yeah, definitely not in the hospital. Only those would be certified as therapy.
Yeah. Well, let's leave the snake stories alone. Let's take our minds back to when we were in nursing school. What was it like going through school and then in comparison to the real world?
A lot of it was, I think I felt really at home on my Med Surg unit. And there were by far more patients that were appreciative and really fit that picture for me. But dealing with the ones that weren't, that was a little bit more difficult. Dealing with the ones that were not always nice. That was difficult for me. Just as a soft-hearted soul, I had to take a deep breath before I walked in to take care of those patients. So that took a lot on my part to prepare myself to take care of patients that I automatically knew were not going to be happy no matter what I did. So I had to learn how to kind of take that with a grain of salt and just do the best that I can.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences for me was understanding just how patients and their family members relied upon me as a nurse, even a brand new nurse. They just see a person dressed as a nurse and all the thoughts that go with that. And the questions that I would have to field often, the emotional reassurance and support. I don't think school prepared me for that as much as it did the clinical side of ththings. And so learning how to deal with the expectations of patients and their families just because I was the nurse. A lot of growing up very quickly. You're in your early 20s and you're dealing with these complex issues that you've only ever read about in a book or watched a video about, and yet patients and families hang on your every word and expect you to be that pillar of strength. And so the emotional side of things was very hard at first, and learning to be able to detach at the end of a shift, because it led to mental exhaustion very, very quickly.
I agree, because of also the fact that how we present nurses, we're very kind, we're very compassionate, and we're smart. Nurses are very smart. Not sure if they're still following criteria here in the United States, like with regards to school admissions. You need to have a certain grade before you can go to nursing school. And so I wanted to think about that really deeply. And I think I owe that to all my instructors, because they would always tell me, you can't be not paying attention. You have to always pay attention to details. You can't be thinking about other things while you're taking care of a patient or you're talking to a doctor, because you can't make a mistake. That's what they always would say when I was in nursing school. And so I really take that by heart. If there's something that was on hand, like I need to do, I always ask another person, is there a resource person that I need to talk to before I do it, even though I'm sure, 100% sure. But if I know that there's harm that can happen, I'll look for a resource, because it's true, just like what you guys said. Every patient, family member look up to us. They hold on to whatever word we say. And I remember one story. The family member knew that the medication is not in the patient's list, but because the nurse says so, they allowed the patient to take the medication, and only to find out that this is not the right med for the patient. So I think I'm sharing that not to look at the bad side of things, but also to help us realize that we need to be really careful. We need to be mindful. We need to take it seriously, I guess, but also learn how to detach at the end of the shift, because it can really put a toll on us when we're too hard on ourselves.
Yeah, for real. We are trusted. The Gallup poll tells us every year we are the most trusted profession. Sometimes that trust, you almost want to say, I don't want to be this responsible person anymore. I think that's why nurses maybe decompress in not so healthy ways, just because it's a challenging job. What about the strangest patient you've ever experienced? I got a real good story here. When I first arrived in Little Rock, they put me to work on a renal transplant floor. Well, at this point in my career, I knew nothing about kidneys. I mean, I really didn't. I had the pleasure of taking care of the first recipients of a simultaneous kidney pancreas transplant in the state of Arkansas, and had little to no knowledge of what steroids can do to the mind. Steroid-induced psychosis is very real when you put these patients on hundreds of milligrams of prednisone in the first few days after transplant. And I walked into his room. I'm calling his name. This patient is nowhere to be found. Well, the way the rooms were set up, there were almost floor-to-ceiling windows, but the bottom of the window was where the heat and air was housed, and it was a kind of a ledge that everybody sat on. There were drapes across the curtain. The curtains were closed. So I'm looking around, checking the bathroom, making sure it's not on the floor or something like that. He unleashes himself from behind these curtains, not a stitch of clothing on, looks at me dead in my eye. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? He runs over to the nightstand, he picks the nightstand up, he hurls the nightstand towards me. I'm ducking and covering. And then he takes off. And it took us, the security, a little while to track him down and put a gown on him and get him back into the room. Of course, the poor man has no recollection of what's going on. It's funny, not funny, I'm just glad he didn't remember it. He was the nicest guy and did really, really well with this kidney and pancreas, but didn't like the steroids. I think that's got to be my number one strangest patient experience. I learned very quickly, prednisone is a very wonderful anti-inflammatory, anti-rejection medication, but watch those high doses and taper very, very carefully, because it'll make you crazy, that stuff. It really will.
That is so funny that you mentioned that, because when I was thinking about strange experiences, I don't remember the specific diagnosis that this patient had, but he did have a habit of sleeping in the nude. So be it. But it became a problem when he started sleepwalking and ending up in other patients' rooms.
Yes.
Well, I have a similar patient who had a steroid overdose, and similar to you, Caroline, he can't remember anything afterwards. But what happened was he's been hearing voices. And so he started pacing, walking around, and then he went up the ceiling. Like removed the tiles from the 3rd floor to the 4th floor to the 5th floor to the 6th floor of the hospital. Patients can actually hear him like crawling from the ceiling, and they were saying, "Is there a squirrel in the ceiling?" They were saying, "Call the animal control." No, it's actually an actual patient, but we're working on it. That's what we were saying. But it's just so strange because he can't remember anything afterwards. You're right. We need to make sure that we know what are the effects of the medications for our patients. And it's not just the diagnosis, but also what are they taking?
Yes, and this episode that I just described was long before medication reconciliation was a thing. But it wasn't even to do with medication reconciliation. But we're talking 30 years ago, and we've come a long way in transplantation. And all we had back then really was some cyclosporin and Imuran, and we relied very heavily on high-dose steroids. I'm not even sure nowadays if we give that much. We're talking about 150 milligrams for those first few days post-surgery.
An emotional part of nursing that I didn't expect or didn't plan for, or I don't feel like I was prepared for, was how our healthcare system is unfair to a lot of people. I've had patients that had very few resources, and, when they were discharging from the hospital because they didn't meet criteria to be in the hospital, yet didn't have resources to follow up. And when you're discharging these people and they're not happy, they're not ready to go home, they don't have what they need to take care of themselves at home, and there is nothing that you can do for them, that is really, really difficult and hard on your heart. And
yes,
that's not why you became a nurse. You don't like to send people out the door without the resources that they need, but our system just isn't set up for everybody the same.
And that was such a huge realization for me. I never thought I would experience the fact that people had to choose between paying for their prescriptions or paying their rent. The way our healthcare system is over here, people lose their livelihood if they are underinsured or uninsured, and they just don't have that support for the necessary things that they need upon discharge. So Laura, I absolutely relate to that, and it's heartbreaking to see that. And I never thought I would experience that. I had no idea how vastly different socialized medicine is from the system that we have here. And there's good and bad for both sides. But when people lose their livelihood because they cannot afford their medicine or choose to go to a physician because they're sick, is heartbreaking for me, because they end up getting sicker and needing more care and attention, thus creating a higher bill. And It's this vicious cycle.
And they make poor choices based on the pain that they're in. I have one patient in mind that I'd see his face, and it was not my proudest moment as a nurse. I was a brand new nurse. I didn't know how to handle these situations. Like I said, I don't feel like I was prepared for this. But he was in the hospital for some back pain, and they ran all kinds of scans, and his condition was inoperable. He wanted surgery to fix the pain in his back. And the surgeon said, I can't do this operation. I can't remember if it was because there wasn't something that he could do or he wasn't able to do it. And I think he was in the hospital for a couple of days while they were trying to find another surgeon in the area who would take a look at his scans and see if there was something that they could do, but they were unsuccessful. So the only thing that they could do was write him some prescription for some pain medicine. And granted, it wasn't very much and it wasn't for a long time. And they discharged him and told him to follow up with his physician. So there was no resolution to his problem. He was obviously still in a lot of pain, but there was nothing that they could do. And the hospital said he's going to have to find someone else to take care of him. So they discharged him. And doing that discharge teaching was excruciating for me because I didn't have any answers for him. The doctors didn't have any answers for him. And he didn't have the resources to find a specialist. I remember him walking out there. He was very angry. And and some of his anger was directed at me. And I know it wasn't at me personally. It was just about his situation. But it was hard. It was hard to discharge him. I didn't have a choice. The hospital was telling me, there's nothing that we can do for him here.
There's a problem. There's a flaw. Healthcare equity, right, is a huge topic right now. Is there anything that we can do as nurses? There's case management. There are resources that you can get into, but there's not enough of these resources. And so being able to get that information from your resource is so important because it's very disheartening. I do have various journals. I have a gratitude journal. I have a work journal because I don't want to mix everything. And I also have a patient journal. So when I was at the bedside, I used to write journals for every patient interaction, especially if it's memorable. And I really need to debrief on something. So I write on it. And I remember I worked in a med psych floor at some point. They have a psychiatric diagnosis, but they need to be medically cleared. And there's this girl, every time I would come into her room, she would always think that I'm her mom. I started talking to her. I said, I'm not your mom, but what are the things that you wanted to share? And she started sharing that her mom is a nurse and her mom took care of her. And her mom was the main person that helped her with their daily activities. And when she passed away, that's when everything got messed up. That's emotional for me because my mom passed away, but it's hard. It's really hard. So as a nurse, how do you detach yourself at the end of the day? So I had to debrief myself. I had to write about her and check myself.
Well, some good stories, some rose and some thorn stories for sure. And believe it or not, we're out of time. I hope our listeners enjoyed hearing about our unexpected medical surgical nursing experiences and perhaps can reflect on some of your own stories and experiences, the rose and the thorn, the good and the bad. They always come together. So as always, thank you for joining us, and we will see you all next time.
We look forward to connecting with you on the next episode of Med Surg Moments, the AMSN podcast. In the meantime, we want to hear from you. Send us your questions, topic ideas, and feedback via our official Med Surg Moments email address, amsnpod@amsn.org. That's amsnpod@amsn.org.
I'd also like to remind you to become a member at AMSN or renew your membership at www.amsn.org. You receive lots of cool benefits and perks, such as discounted pricing on the annual convention and continuing education.
We encourage you to help us spread the word and subscribe to the Med Surg Moments podcast via your smartphone podcast app to receive notifications of future episodes. Please be sure to leave us a review and recommend Med Surg Moments wherever you get your podcasts to help us reach even more listeners.
I invite you to join the conversation by sharing your ideas and questions on AMSN's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter pages. And don't forget to add #MedSurgMoments to your post. Simply enter AMSN in the search field on any of these social media platforms to connect with us.
The content within the Med Surg Moments podcast represents the views, thoughts, and opinions of the co-hosts and may not necessarily reflect the views, thoughts, and opinions of the Academy of Medical Surgical Nurses. Until next time, I'm Caroline.
Laura.
And this is Maritess. And always remember, Med Surg Moments is a moment in our lives, a moment in our med surg careers that makes a huge difference.